The harsh winter wind cut through Marcus Thompson's worn jacket as he hurried down 3rd Avenue in downtown Seattle. At 17, he had already mastered the art of becoming invisible. Not too fast, not too slow, just another face in the crowd heading somewhere with purpose. That's what he had learned in his 8 months on the streets. Marcus clutched his backpack closer, feeling the reassuring weight of his laptop inside. The old machine had been a gift from Mr. Wilson at the public library, who had noticed Marcus spending hours there each day. Education is your ticket out, Mr. Wilson had told him, and Marcus believed it with all his heart. Behind Jerry's used books, in a narrow alley that smelled of old coffee from the nearby cafe, Marcus had created his home. It wasn't much, just a dry corner protected by an overhanging roof and hidden behind 2 large dumpsters, but it was safer than the shelters. The shelters asked too many questions, and at 17, they would just send him back into the foster system. Marcus couldn't go back there, not after what happened at the last home. He arranged his cardboard carefully, making sure it wasn't visible from the street. His fingers were red from the cold as he pulled out his prized possession, a battery-powered camping lantern he'd bought with 2 days' worth of panhandling money. The light wasn't much, but it was enough to study by. "Hey, kid," a rough voice called out. It was Jerry, the bookstore owner, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a paperback. "Thought you might need these. Temperature's dropping tonight." Marcus accepted the offerings gratefully. Inside the bag was a warm cheese sandwich and a new pair of wool socks. Jerry was one of the few people who knew Marcus's situation, but never pushed him to leave or tried to call social services. Instead, he quietly helped in his own way. "Thanks, Jerry," Marcus said, his voice soft but steady. "I finished that law book you lent me." Jerry nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "Keep it. Might come in handy when you're arguing cases in court someday." That was Marcus's dream, to become a lawyer. It seemed impossible most days, but he clung to it anyway. His online high school grades were perfect, even though he had to do most of his homework in the library or by the light of his small lamp. The library's free internet was his lifeline to education. As Jerry walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone, an old model he'd found in a recycling bin and fixed up. It still worked for basic things, and that's all he needed. He opened his email to check his latest assignment grades. History, A. English, A. Mathematics, A. The A bothered him, but doing advanced calculus by lamplight wasn't easy. His mind drifted to his mother as he ate the sandwich slowly, making it last. She would have been proud of these grades. Before the cancer took her, she had always told him that education was something no one could take away from you. After she died 2 years ago, his father had fallen apart, turning to drinks and eventually ending up in prison for a drunk driving accident. The foster homes that followed were a blur of different faces and places. Some were okay, others weren't. The last one, with the Petersons, had been the final straw. Marcus touched the fading scar on his arm, remembering. Running away had been scary, but staying would have been worse. A police siren wailed in the distance, making Marcus instinctively shrink deeper into his corner. He had learned which cops to avoid. Officer Reeves was the worst of them. The man seemed to take personal pleasure in harassing the homeless, especially the young ones. Marcus pulled out his textbook, positioning it under the lamp's glow. Tonight's chapter was about civil rights law. He smiled slightly as he began to read, losing himself in the words. This was his escape, his future. Even as the temperature dropped and his breath formed clouds in the cold air, Marcus kept reading. In his small corner of Seattle, surrounded by cardboard walls and wrapped in determination, a homeless teen dreamed of justice while the city slept around him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Marcus had his books, his grades, and his dream. Sometimes, that was enough to keep the cold at bay. The next evening started like any other for Marcus. He sat in his usual spot behind Jerry's used books, his phone propped up against his backpack while he watched an online physics lecture. The phone was recording the lecture for later review, a habit Marcus had developed since his night vision wasn't great in the dim light. A sharp beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness, making Marcus squint. He recognized the heavy footsteps before he saw the face, Officer James Reeves. The cop had been making rounds more often lately, hassling everyone who lived on the streets. Well, Officer Reeves said, his flashlight beam steady on Marcus's face. "What do we have here? a runaway taking up valuable property space. Marcus kept his voice steady, just like he practiced. Good evening, officer. I'm not doing anything wrong. According to City Ordinance 647.2, sitting or lying down in public spaces is allowed between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. The officer's face darkened. Nobody liked being quoted the law, especially not by a homeless teenager. Reeves stepped closer, his polished boots entering the circle of light from Marcus's lamp. Listen here, smart mouth, Reeves growled. I don't care what ordinances you've memorized. This area is being cleaned up, and that means no more street rats hanging around. Marcus's heart pounded, but he stayed calm. He had dealt with bullies before, both in foster homes and on the streets. Sir, I have a right to be here. I'm not blocking any doorway or business entrance. Reeves grabbed Marcus's backpack, dumping his books onto the wet ground. Rights? You want to talk about rights? He kicked the books, sending Marcus's precious law text skidding across the pavement. How about my right to keep this neighborhood clean? Please stop, Marcus said, reaching for his books. Those are library books. I'm responsible for them. The officer's hand shot out, grabbing Marcus's collar and yanking him up. You're responsible for nothing, you little punk. Just another drain on society. What happened next moved too fast for Marcus to fully process. As he tried to protect his books, Reeves shoved him hard against the wall. Marcus's head cracked against the brick, sending sparks of pain through his skull. His lamp fell, rolling away and casting crazy shadows across the scene. I got some friends paying good money to develop this area, Reeves hissed, his face close to Marcus's. And I'm not letting some homeless kid mess up their plans. You got 1 hour to clear out, or I'll make sure you regret it. Through the pain and fear, Marcus noticed something. His phone was still propped up, its small recording light blinking in the darkness. It had captured everything. Reeves wasn't done. He kicked Marcus's books again, then reached for the phone. What's this? Stolen property? It's mine, Marcus said quickly, his head still throbbing. I found it and fixed it. Check the serial number. It's not reported stolen. The officer smirked, dropping the phone onto Marcus's textbook. 1 hour, kid. When I come back, you better be gone. He leaned in closer, whispering, and if you think about complaining, remember, it's your word against mine. Who do you think they'll believe? As Reeves walked away, Marcus slumped against the wall, his whole body shaking. His fingers found a wet spot on the back of his head, blood, but not too much. He could hear Reeves talking on his radio as he walked away, something about clearing the zone and developer's schedule. With trembling hands, Marcus picked up his phone. The recording was still going. He played back the last few minutes, his eyes widening as he listened. The video had captured everything, the assault, the threats, and most importantly, Reeves's comments about developers paying him. Marcus looked around his small corner, the place that had been his home for months. He had 1 hour to leave, but now he also had something else, evidence. His law books had taught him about evidence, about justice, about standing up for what's right. The question was, what should he do with it? Marcus's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he gathered his scattered belongings. The back of his head throbbed where it had hit the brick wall, and his phone felt heavy with its recorded evidence. He needed somewhere safe to go, but all the usual spots would be too obvious if Officer Reeves came looking for him. As he stuffed his wet books into his backpack, a voice called out from the darkness. Young man, are you all right? Marcus spun around, ready to run, but stopped when he saw an elderly Asian woman standing in the bookstore's back doorway. She held a first aid kit in one hand and had a concerned look on her face. I'm Sarah Chen, she said, keeping her distance so she wouldn't frighten him. I own the bookstore now. Jerry was my brother. He passed away last month. I saw what happened through the security camera. Marcus hesitated. Jerry had mentioned a sister who used to be a lawyer, but he'd never met her. I'm Marcus, he said finally. I need to leave. Officer Reeves said. You need medical attention first, Sarah interrupted firmly. Come inside. That officer won't dare come into private property without a warrant, and I'm not giving him one. The back room of the bookstore was warm and smelled like old books and tea. Sarah pointed to a comfortable chair while she locked the door behind them. Sit, she ordered, opening the first aid kit. Let me see that head wound. As she cleaned the cut, Marcus played the video on his phone. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she listened to Reeves's threats and his slip about the developers. That's not just police brutality, she said, applying antiseptic that made Marcus wince. That's evidence of corruption. He's taking bribes to clear homeless people from areas marked for development. She paused, thinking. Did you check if he went back to his car afterward? Marcus nodded carefully. The phone kept recording. He made some calls. I haven't listened to that part yet. They played the rest of the recording. Reeves's voice came through clearly as he made calls from his patrol car, mentioning names of development companies, other officers involved in the scheme, and amounts of money that made Marcus's eyes widen. This is bigger than just harassment, Sarah said, finishing with the bandage. This is organized corruption, but it's also very dangerous. She looked at Marcus with worried eyes. They're not going to let this evidence get to court easily. Marcus felt cold despite the warm room. What should I do? Delete it and run. Sarah shook her head firmly. No, we fight, but we do it smart. She walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out some papers. First, we need to secure this evidence properly. I'm going to call Alana Rodriguez. She's a public defender I used to mentor. She specializes in cases against law enforcement. As Sarah made the call, Marcus explored the back room. It was bigger than he expected, with a small bathroom and even a couch that looked like it could be slept on. He noticed his reflection in a mirror and was shocked by how pale he looked, the white bandage stark against his dark hair. Alina will be here in 30 minutes, Sarah announced, hanging up the phone. Until then, you should eat something. When was your last proper meal? Before Marcus could answer, she was pulling out containers of leftover Chinese food and heating them in a small microwave. The smell made his stomach growl embarrassingly loud. While they waited, Sarah explained her background as a public defender who specialized in civil rights cases. 25 years of fighting corrupt systems, she said, watching Marcus devour the food. But this video of yours, this could crack open something big. Why are you helping me? Marcus asked suddenly. You don't even know me. Sarah's face softened. Jerry told me about you. About your grades, your dreams of becoming a lawyer. He was proud of you, you know. Said you reminded him of me at your age, too stubborn to give up. She glanced at the clock. Alina will be here soon. But first, we need to talk about your safety. This isn't just about one bad cop anymore. When people with money and power feel threatened, they fight back hard. Marcus looked at his phone, then at Sarah. For the first time since his mother died, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could turn into something good. Not just for him, but for all the people Reeves had hurt. Alina Rodriguez arrived at the bookstore exactly 30 minutes later, carrying a worn leather briefcase and wearing a sharp business suit despite the late hour. Her quick eyes took in Marcus's bandaged head and Sarah's protective stance beside him. Show me the video first, Alina said, pulling out a laptop. Then we'll talk about what happens next. They watched the footage together. Alina's face grew darker with each passing minute, and she took rapid notes on a yellow legal pad. When they reached the part where Reeves made his calls from the patrol car, she leaned forward, turning up the volume. Stop right there, she said suddenly. Play that part again. They listened as Reeves mentioned a company called Horizon Development and something about weekly payments. Alina's pen moved faster. This isn't just about one corrupt cop, she said, looking up from her notes. Horizon Development has been buying up properties all over the city. They're connected to at least 3 city council members. She turned to Marcus. Do you know any other homeless people who've had run-ins with Reeves? Marcus nodded slowly. There's Jamie and Dex who sleep near the park, and Maria from the church steps. Reeves gave them all trouble last week. We need their statements, Alina said. But we have to move carefully. If Reeves realizes we're building a case, he might try to intimidate them or worse. Sarah brought them all tea, and they gathered around her small office table. Alina pulled out more papers from her briefcase. Here's what we're dealing with, she explained, spreading out documents. Horizon Development has been buying cheap properties in poor neighborhoods. But to keep prices low, they need to show the areas are undesirable. That's where Reeves comes in. It harasses homeless people until they leave, Marcus said, understanding dawning on his face. Then the property values drop. Exactly, Alina nodded. But your video gives us something we've never had before, direct evidence of the payoffs. She looked at Marcus seriously. Are you willing to testify? It will be dangerous. These people have money and influence. Marcus touched the bandage on his head, remembering Reeves's threats. But he also thought about Jamie, Dex, Maria, and all the others who'd been hurt by this scheme. I'll do it, he said firmly. But how do we protect the others? Elena smiled for the first time that night. That's where Sarah comes in. The bookstore can be our safe house. We'll bring witnesses here one at a time, record their statements, and keep them safe until the hearing. Sarah was already nodding. The storeroom upstairs has a small apartment. Jerry used to live there. It's perfect. They worked late into the night, making plans. Alana taught Marcus how to properly document everything, dates, times, locations of every incident. Sarah made calls to old friends from her public defender days, building a network of support. Around midnight, they heard police sirens nearby. Everyone froze, but the cars passed by. Elena used the moment to make her point. From now on, we trust no one in uniform, she said. Reeves has friends on the force. Marcus, you'll stay here with Sarah. I've already filed an emergency guardianship petition. Sarah's willing to take temporary custody. Marcus looked at Sarah in surprise. She shrugged, smiling. You need a safe place, and I need help with the bookstore. Jerry would have wanted it this way. Elena packed up her files, leaving copies with Sarah. Tomorrow, we start gathering statements. But tonight, Marcus needs rest. That head injury needs time to heal. As Elena left through the back door, Marcus watched Sarah setting up the couch with pillows and blankets. For the first time in months, he wouldn't have to sleep in the cold. Try to sleep, Sarah said gently. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. Marcus lay down, his mind racing with everything that had happened. In just one day, he'd gone from homeless teen to key witness in a corruption case. He had a safe place to stay and people willing to fight alongside him. But as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help wondering how many more Officer Reeves were out there and how many other homeless teens hadn't been lucky enough to accidentally record their abuse. 3 days into the investigation, Marcus noticed the police car parked across from the bookstore. It wasn't Reeves, but he recognized Officer Collins, one of the names mentioned in Reeves's recorded phone calls. They were being watched. Inside the bookstore, Sarah had transformed the upper room into a command center. Maps covered one wall, showing properties bought by Verizon Development. Red pins marked locations where homeless people reported harassment. The pattern was clear. Wherever Horizon planned to buy, the harassment started shortly after. Another one, Elena said, hanging up her phone. She placed a new pin on the map. Maria found 2 more witnesses. Both were beaten up last month when they refused to leave their spot near the old factory. Guess who bought that factory this morning? Horizon Development, Marcus answered, checking his notes on the laptop Sarah had given him. He'd been tracking property sales through public records. They got it for half the market value. A bell rang downstairs, their warning system for visitors. Through the security camera, they watched Jamie shuffle into the store. He was one of their key witnesses, a Vietnam veteran who'd lived on the streets for 20 years. Sarah went down to get him while Elena and Marcus prepared the recording equipment. They'd learned to be thorough, documenting everything in case something happened to their witnesses. They're getting nervous, Jamie said as soon as he sat down. His hands shook as he accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah. 2 cops tried to arrest Dex this morning. Said he was selling drugs. Dex doesn't even drink coffee, let alone sell drugs. Elena's face hardened. They're trying to discredit our witnesses. Jamie, I think you should stay here tonight. We can't risk. A loud crash from downstairs cut her off. Marcus ran to the security monitor. 2 men in hoodies were throwing bricks through the bookstore's front window. Call 911. Sarah shouted, but Elena grabbed her arm. Wait, she said. Look. On the screen, they watched Officer Collins's patrol car drive slowly past the vandals. He looked right at them but kept driving. The message was clear, the police wouldn't help. After the vandals left, they surveyed the damage. Glass covered the sidewalk, and a brick had a note wrapped around it. Jar up the case or next time, it's not the window. Instead of looking scared, Sarah looked angry. She picked up the brick with the note. using a plastic bag to preserve fingerprints. They just made a mistake, she said. This is evidence of witness intimidation. Add it to the file. Marcus helped clean up the glass while Alina made calls. More witnesses had come forward after seeing the news about Horizon Development's suspicious property deals. Each story was similar: harassment, threats, and sudden property sales at low prices. That evening, as they added new pins to their map, Marcus found something interesting in the property records. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his screen. "All the properties Horizon bought. They were sold to different shell companies first, but look at the addresses. They'd all lead back to one office building." Alina leaned in. "The Carlton building? That's where City Council member Richardson has his private law office." "The same Richardson who's been pushing for urban renewal projects," Sarah added, her eyes wide. "Marcus, can you check who owns the Carlton building?" A few clicks later, they had their answer. The building was owned by another shell company, but the tax records showed a connection to someone they knew, Officer Reeves's brother-in-law. "It's all connected," Alina said softly. "The police, the city council, the developers, they're all in it together." Marcus looked at their wall of evidence, the maps, the witness statements, the photos of injuries, and now the brick with its threatening note. They had proof of a conspiracy that went far beyond one corrupt cop. The sound of breaking glass from downstairs made them all jump. But this time, when they checked the security camera, they saw something worse than vandals. Officer Reeves himself was walking through the broken window, and he was wearing rubber gloves. "Get the evidence," Alina whispered urgently. "Everything important. Now, we need to get out through the back door." They're done playing games. Sarah's sister's house across town became their new safe house. As they unloaded boxes of evidence from Alina's car at midnight, Marcus couldn't stop looking over his shoulder. Officer Reeves had just missed them at the bookstore, arriving moments after they'd slipped out through the hidden back exit that Jerry had installed years ago. "We got everything important," Alina said, spreading their files across the dining room table. "And I had all the witness statements backed up to a secure server. They can trash the bookstore, but they can't destroy our evidence." Marcus opened his laptop, checking the news. The break-in at the bookstore was already being reported as a routine burglary investigation. The article quoted Officer Reeves, who claimed to have responded to a silent alarm. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a document she grabbed in their hurry to escape. It was an old city planning map, coffee-stained and wrinkled. All these marked areas, they match perfectly with Horizon's purchases, but this map is from 6 months before they started buying properties. Elena studied the map closely. Someone in the city planning office had to be involved. They knew which areas would be targeted before it even started. Marcus was half listening while he practiced his testimony again. In 2 days, he would have to tell his story in court at the preliminary hearing. Alana had been coaching him for hours each day. "Remember," she said, noticing his nervousness, "just tell the truth exactly as it happened. Don't try to guess or assume anything. Stick to what you saw and heard." Sarah brought them all coffee and sandwiches. None of them had slept much since fleeing the bookstore. "The security cameras caught everything," she said. "Reeves breaking in, searching the place, taking files. All recorded and uploaded automatically to my cloud storage. More evidence of corruption," Alina nodded. "But they're getting desperate. That makes them dangerous." A knock at the door made everyone freeze. Sarah checked the security camera she'd installed that morning. It was Jamie, looking scared. "They'd arrested Dex," he said as soon as they let him in. "Planted drugs in his sleeping bag, but I got it on video." He held up his phone with shaking hands. "I was watching from behind the dumpster when they did it. Recorded the whole thing." Elena quickly connected Jamie's phone to her laptop, backing up the video. On the screen, they could clearly see Officer Collins and another cop planting evidence in Dex's belongings before discovering it. "This isn't just about property anymore," Sarah said quietly. "They're trying to destroy people's lives to cover their tracks." Marcus felt sick watching the video, but it strengthened his resolve. "We need to show all of this in court. Not just my video, but everything. The pattern of harassment, the property deals, the cover-ups." Elena was already nodding. "I've subpoenaed records from the city planning office and Horizon Development. They'll try to fight it, but Judge Martinez is honest. She'll want to see everything." They worked through the night, organizing their evidence into a clear timeline. Marcus practiced his testimony while Alina asked him tough questions, preparing him for cross-examination. Sarah and Jamie worked on connecting more dots between the corrupted officials. Around dawn, Alina made an important discovery in the subpoenaed documents that had just arrived by email. The money trail, she said, her eyes wide. Horizon wasn't just buying properties. They were paying consulting fees to a company owned by 3 police officers' wives, including Mrs. Reeves. Marcus looked at their wall of evidence, now rebuilt in Sarah's sister's living room. Videos, documents, witness statements, photos, maps, all pointing to a conspiracy bigger than any of them had imagined. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked him gently. "Once you testify, there's no going back. These people will lose everything, their jobs, their freedom, their reputations." Marcus thought about all the people like him, forced to live on the streets, harassed and abused by the very people sworn to protect them. He thought about Dex, sitting in jail on false charges. "I'm ready," he said firmly. They chose to break the law. Now they have to face the consequences. Alina checked her watch. "Get some sleep, everyone. Tomorrow we review everything one last time. The day after that, we go to court." She looked at Marcus with concern. "And from now until then, nobody goes anywhere alone." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Marcus arrived with Elena and Sarah. Officer Reeves stood near the entrance with his lawyer, looking confident in his pressed uniform. He smirked when he saw Marcus, but the expression faded when he noticed how many people were with him. Jamie was there, along with Maria and 10 other homeless witnesses they protected. Even Mr. Wilson from the library had come to show support. But most surprisingly, there were dozens of uniformed police officers Marcus had never seen before. "Internal affairs," Alina whispered to him. "The honest cops want to clean up their department too." Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat straight in his chair, wearing the new suit Sarah had bought him. Judge Martinez looked stern as she reviewed the preliminary documents. The courtroom was packed, with reporters filling the back rows. Reeves's lawyer, Mr. Davidson, spoke first. He was tall and expensive-looking in his designer suit. "Your Honor, this case is built entirely on the word of a homeless teenager with a history of running away from foster homes. Officer Reeves was simply doing his job, protecting property and maintaining order." Elena stood up. "Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of not just Officer Reeves's actions, but a widespread corruption scheme involving police officers, city officials, and developers." "Objection," Davidson shouted. "These are wild accusations without proof." "Overruled," Judge Martinez said firmly. "But Mrs. Rodriguez, you will need to provide concrete evidence for these claims." Marcus watched Elena carefully, just as they had practiced. When she called him to the stand, he walked steadily, remembering her advice. "Just tell the truth. The truth is on our side." After swearing him in, Elena started with simple questions about his life on the streets and his encounter with Officer Reeves. Marcus spoke clearly, describing everything exactly as it happened. Then came Davidson's cross-examination. He towered over Marcus, his voice sharp. "Isn't it true that you're just angry at the system? Making up stories about a respected police officer to get attention?" "No, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "I have evidence." "Evidence?" Davidson laughed. "Your Honor, any evidence this boy claims to have would be circumstantial at best." Elena stood up. "Your Honor, permission to play Exhibit A." Judge Martinez nodded, and Elena connected her laptop to the courtroom's display system. The video started playing, showing Marcus's corner behind the bookstore. The whole room watched in silence as Officer Reeves appeared, his threats clearly audible. But when the video continued to Reeves's phone calls from his patrol car, the real shock came. His voice filled the courtroom, discussing payoffs, property deals, and plans to frame homeless people for crimes they didn't commit. Gasps echoed through the room. Several people in expensive suits, developers and city officials, got up to leave, but court officers blocked the doors. "There's more, Your Honor," Elena said. She played Jamie's video of the officers planting drugs in Dex's belongings. Then she showed the financial records linking Horizon Development to the police officers' families. Marcus watched Officer Reeves's face turn pale. The officer's lawyer was frantically writing notes. But Reeves wasn't paying attention. He was staring at Marcus with a mix of shock and rage. "Your Honor," Elena continued, "we have evidence of at least 12 instances of police harassment coordinated with property purchases by Horizon Development. We have witnesses ready to testify about false arrests, planted evidence, and systematic abuse of homeless citizens." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Martinez banged her gavel for silence. "Mr. Davidson," she said sharply, "does your client wish to respond to this evidence?" Davidson leaned over to whisper to Reeves. The officer pushed him away and stood up. "I want to change my plea," Reeves said loudly, "but I'm not going down alone. I have names. Everyone who was involved. Everyone who took money." The whispers turned to shouts. Reporters rushed from the room to phone their editors. Several well-dressed people in the gallery were now being handcuffed by internal affairs officers. Marcus felt Sarah squeeze his shoulder. They had done it. The truth was finally coming out. Judge Martinez banged her gavel again. "Order. This court is in recess until tomorrow morning. Officer Reeves, you will be taken into custody. And young man," she looked directly at Marcus, "this court owes you its gratitude." 3 months after the courtroom revelation, Marcus stood in front of Jerry's used books, watching workers install the new sign, Jen and Thompson Community Legal Center. The old bookstore had been transformed into a free legal clinic for homeless youth, funded by the fines paid by Horizon Development and the corrupt officials. Sarah worked beside him, arranging law books on the newly rebuilt shelves. The clinic would officially open tomorrow, but they already had a waiting list of young people seeking help. "The newspaper's here again," Sarah said, pointing through the window. "They want another interview about the changes in the police department." The changes have been big. After Officer Reeves's confession, 23 people were arrested, including 3 city council members, 6 police officers, and numerous real estate developers. The new police chief had implemented strict anti-corruption measures and created a special unit to protect homeless citizens. "Let them wait," Marcus replied, straightening his tie. He had his own appointment to prepare for. Elena was picking him up in 10 minutes to take him to the courthouse, not as a witness this time, but as a participant in the new youth advocacy program she'd started. Dex walked in through the front door, looking healthy and clean in his new security guard uniform. After being cleared of all charges, he'd been the first to join their job training program. "Mail's here," he said, handing Marcus a thick envelope, "including your test results." Marcus's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope. He'd been studying for months, taking online classes while helping set up the legal center. The paper inside made his heart jump. He passed his high school equivalency exam with top scores. "I knew you could do it," Sarah said proudly, hugging him. Jerry would have been so proud too. The bell above the door chimed again. Alana walked in, followed by Jamie, who now worked as their outreach coordinator. "Ready for your first day as a legal advocate?" she asked Marcus. "Almost," he answered, gathering his notes. They had 3 cases today, all homeless youth facing similar situations to what he'd experienced. Now he could help them, not just with the law, but with understanding their rights and finding safe places to stay. Maria came in next, pushing a cart of donated clothes and supplies. The back room of the center had become a small shelter, offering temporary housing while they helped young people find permanent solutions. The room where Marcus had once hidden from Officer Reeves now held bunk beds and lockers. "Channel 5 did a story about the new police training program," Maria said, turning on the small TV they kept at the front desk. On screen, they showed officers learning about homeless rights and proper intervention techniques. Marcus recognized some of the internal affairs officers who had supported them in court. They were now leading the reform efforts. A car pulled up outside, Mr. Wilson from the library, dropping off more donated laptops for their education program. "These are from the tech company downtown," he explained. "They want to sponsor computer classes for the shelter residents." Marcus helped unload the laptops, remembering how that first borrowed computer had changed his life. Now they could offer the same opportunity to others. Elena checked her watch. "Time to go. The judge is expecting us at 10. Before leaving, Marcus walked through the center one last time. The walls were covered with resource information, legal rights posters, and something special, a framed copy of the court decision that had changed everything. Below it hung a simple photo of Jerry, smiling in front of his beloved bookstore. You know, Sarah said, walking with him to Elena's car, when Jerry told me about this brilliant homeless kid who wanted to be a lawyer, I thought he was exaggerating. Now look at you, 17 years old and already helping change the system. Marcus smiled, thinking about the cases waiting for them at the courthouse. We're just getting started, he said. There are so many others who need help, who need to know they have rights and people who will fight for them. As they drove to the courthouse, Marcus saw Officer Collins's old patrol car, now being used by one of the new community outreach officers. The officer waved as they passed, not a threat anymore, but a reminder of how much had changed. Ready? Elena asked as they parked at the courthouse. Marcus looked at his notes, his tie, his official advocate badge. He thought about all the scared, homeless kids who needed someone on their side, someone who understood what they were going through. Ready, he answered firmly. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was helping others survive too. And that made all the difference.